Right, welcome back, and let me again welcome our guests, Dr. Mohamed Fahmy, Professor of Middle East Politics at the AUC. We thank you again for being with us.
Thank you.
You're welcome. If I may start with commenting on this important platform for countries and ministers and high-ranking officials from the energy sector to meet together in order to hold a kind of dialogue and reshape strategies and find solutions to this sector. How significant is that for Egypt? Where does that put Egypt on this sector worldwide?
Well, I mean, first of all, we have to remember that Egypt in a few months will be hosting the COP27, which is the most globalized event regarding renewable energy. As we've seen last year, it was one of the major events in the global calendar. Egypt is also quite keen and does have a lot of resources in terms of renewable and permanent energy through wind and solar energy. We have great reservoirs of that. And we're also gradually moving towards sustainability. So this is a global trend, and Egypt is definitely part of that. Recently, we've had discoveries of natural gas, as we know, in the Mediterranean. Again, that's a major file. Natural gas is known to be less pollutant than other forms of fossil fuels. So it's also very important that we invest more in that field. So we have a lot of, I think, items on the agenda. We have also the nuclear power plant that's currently being installed in the northern coast with aid of Russia. So we have a diversified bracket of energy and that we need to invest in and move gradually along with the rest of the world away from fossil fuels.
Right. Well, we're speaking about the trend. What trend is going to go green? So speaking about what you've been speaking about is the renewable energy and how Egypt is going through some of the projects concerning this part. But also this time we're speaking about this exhibition that bring together some of the big organizations concerning the petroleum and gas, in specific, the OPEC and the WAPEC, plus, of course, definitely ministers from different countries, representatives for the of this those organizations and others. If I may ask you here, we are aware that during the past period, Egypt has been paying lots of attention to this sector, and there were many of the discoveries that have been taking place. In 2018, Egypt has announced that it is self-sufficient in fulfilling the domestic needs. If I may ask you, where is Egypt today from the international on the international map, particularly on or in the gas and energy field? And I'm speaking that because I guess it's becoming very crucial to speak about this issue at the backdrop of what's going on in the whole world, right? Please.
Yes. Well, I mean, currently Egypt is a net exporter of natural gas, as you mentioned, since 2018 with the new discoveries in the Dohr field and the other parts of the Eastern Mediterranean, and there are likely to be more discoveries in the coming period. I mean, this is currently a huge political also source of conflict or tension between the countries of the Eastern Mediterranean. Egypt has recently established treaties with countries like Cyprus and Greece to ensure that there is agreement and mapping of the different parts of the Mediterranean to allow for each country to build on its own reservoir and have some sort of like bordering within the Mediterranean. Egypt is very well poised to play a major role, having the close proximity to Europe and also the ongoing tension between Europe and Russia, which is the most powerful source of energy to the rest of the European continent. So having an alternative source that's likely to be cheaper, even closer to Southern Europe, connecting into networks of energy through Greece and through other countries in the Mediterranean basin will definitely help also in exports. It will help yield more foreign currency to Egypt. So I think building and also investing more in that field is beneficial for a country like Egypt, which is also aiming to diversify its energy basket.
If we're speaking here about such a conference that is a chance or a platform for dialogue among member states and representatives, and at the same time put some solutions to some of inevitable challenges facing the whole world, particularly in this sector. If we can speak a little bit about the challenges that is really facing this sector, and how, because, or what I can say here is Egypt is not just seeking to be a provider for gas to the areas you spoke about respectively, but also is seeking to be an energy hub. So if we can just, or if you can just illustrate, what does this mean for people to understand what we are speaking about?
Well, I mean, first of all, as we mentioned earlier, the whole world is moving gradually from fossil fuels. And there are targets that are set by 2030 and 2050 to reduce carbon emissions, which means that the overall energy basket will be much less dependent on fossil fuels and more dependent on permanent and renewable sources of energy. For a country like Egypt and Africa, Egypt has made the commitment in the previous COP that it will lead Africa and the other developing countries with regard to diversifying its energy basket and depending more on other sources of energy apart from fossil fuels. Doing that requires a lot of investment, human investment, financial resources, manpower, expertise. A lot of factors are into play here. Egypt mentioned that clearly in the COP, but in order for that to happen, there needs to be also support from the rest of the world, primarily from the developed countries who have been causing the majority of the pollution in the world over the past few decades. And now they are pressing the rest of the world to reduce their carbon emissions. Well, now countries like Egypt, like India, we've heard, these countries are saying, well, yes, we are ready to bear the brunt, but you also, as developed countries, need to be supportive in that regard. You need to provide us with the needed financing and also with the needed expertise, and your corporations, the major oil and gas corporations in the world, are either British or American or French or Italian. These major corporations are currently moving gradually also away from the area of fossil fuels into renewable energies. So by maybe the next decade, we will find that most of them are investing heavily in fields like solar energy and wind energy, and that's when a country like Egypt can play a major role, again, because of the fact that we have a lot of reservoir, a lot of resources in that field. We can definitely work with them, attract more investment with regard to oil and with regard to solar and wind energy, which will be in the coming few years, very, very soon, they will start becoming the major or the main source of energy in the world. So there's a lot of opportunities here for a country like Egypt to build on in that sector.
Indeed. Since you brought up the issue of the COP27, and since you brought up the issue of Africa should not be bearing the brunt alone for the gas emission or the pollution that is taking place. Well, why don't let me hear a read or the speech of the president as he spoke today in this conference. And when he commented in this ministerial discussion panel, he spoke about that, or he said that Africa is the least developed region due to the era-long colonization in its early modernity. But when he focused, he said that we should not be bearing the consequences of this dark episode in the history twice. How did you read what the president said?
Well, I think again it's reminiscent of the statements that would echo the sentiment of most developing countries, really. Because as the developed world, as the Industrial Revolution happened throughout Western Europe and North America, these were the countries that gained most of the benefit. Most of the investment, most of the economic development happened in that part of the world. And on the other hand, the resources were exploited from developing countries in Africa, and Latin America, and Asia. So this was a price that was paid mostly by the resources, or this global development happened thanks to the resources, both human and material resources, coming from these countries. Now, there's another cost to be borne with regard to the pollution, with regards to the environment that has been hampered greatly because of this development. So it doesn't make sense, or it will be extremely even more unfair now for the developing countries to bear this responsibility alone. So there needs to be, as we were just talking, the developed world has to also share the responsibility and support these countries. We're not saying, that we're not interested or that we'll not work on it, because it's obviously a global dilemma and it requires global solutions with equal participation from the entire world. But it cannot be left alone for the developing countries, asking them or pressing them, because we have to also understand that this is a costly process. The process of changing your energy grid from certain sources to others, it's a very costly process. It requires a change in the infrastructure. It requires a lot of education, knowledge acquisition, gaining more expertise. There needs to be a healthy environment that supports the process of changing your energy grid from fossil fuels to renewable and permanent sources of energy. And what Egypt here is saying is that, yes, we're ready to do that, but we need support and we need also acknowledgement from the rest of the world that this is a joint project.
We need balance. And as he said here, we are seeking balanced and fair decisions to be taken during the upcoming UN meeting. These are, or I'm just quoting the statements of the President in the upcoming UN meeting, COP27, on combating climate change. What could be seen as fair and balanced solutions for from the point of view, or from the African and the Middle East point of view or vision? Or what should we be expecting from the outside world?
Well, talking about Africa, of course, the picture is quite diverse, because different African countries have different energy grids and different sources of energy. For instance, a country like Nigeria does have huge reservoirs of oil. Algeria in the northern part of Africa, Libya, these are countries that are rich in oil and gas. Egypt now could be considered as a rich country in terms of its gas reservoirs, not necessarily oil. Of course, the Gulf countries, the GCC countries, have huge reservoirs. So the process really differs from one country to another. There needs to be case-specific solutions that target the specificities or the special, the context of each country.
At this point, we're just speaking about the climate change. We're not just speaking about the energy sector, because here he was addressing the attendees who were supposed to be coming to attend the UN meeting, the COP27. So he was speaking here about balanced and fair decisions that should be taken from everybody.
Yes.
And that should be reflecting positively on this part of the world that is not really the reason for the world pollution.
Yes, but the two aspects are very closely linked. When we talk about reducing the carbon imprint, then we're talking about changing the energy grid of every country. So the two processes, the two elements are very closely linked to each other. So when a country that's heavily dependent on oil and gas is trying to reduce its carbon emissions, be more environmentally friendly, then it has to invest in the process of changing its energy grid. This is the main source or the main tool by which countries can reduce their carbon emissions. There are countries that are able to do that with lesser friction, like Saudi Arabia, for instance. They have the resources and they have started on a long-term process that would enable them to change, if it goes well, according to plan, to change the energy grid by 2050 to reduce the dependence of the economy on oil and gas. Other countries, and hence here the difference, countries in Africa, for instance, Nigeria, countries like Algeria in the north, these countries do not have the same amount of resources that would enable them to do this shift gradually without a huge cost, without a lot of losses, whether financial or human or in terms of investment, development in general. And that's why we need to understand that there needs to be case-specific solutions for each country, especially in the developing world. The majority of the countries in the developing world are countries that are relatively poor in terms of the resources, and in terms of their oil and gas, they depend mostly on these sectors for their income. So we cannot expect these countries all of a sudden to stop their dependence on these sectors without providing them with the alternatives. And that's here, again, they're talking about balance. In order to reach balance, we have to understand that it is not an easy process, and it will require a lot of time, a lot of investment, and there needs to be, because, I mean, what happened in the COP, in the previous one, there were a lot of debates going on about well, we are the countries that are interested in reducing the carbon print. Great, okay. Then what are you going to do about it as developed countries? We are going to issue resolutions. We're going to say that we are the world committed to these targets. But then the major point, the major talking point was what? These countries are ready to provide for the rest, for the developing countries that do not have the resources to do this change in their energy grid. What are they going to do? It's not only a financial process, it's also a technical process that requires scientific knowledge, again, an exchange of ideas and support. And so far, the developed world has not really delivered on its promise to do so.
Indeed. Very much indeed. They have not. And this is why we need to tackle all these issues at this upcoming UN meeting. If we come back to Egypt, because we need to go to the other segment. If we go back to Egypt, and what opportunities does this conference and exhibition open for countries in Egypt, Africa, and the Mediterranean at large?
I mean, the event itself is very important when we have organizations like OPEC, which were just recently having a lot of discussions on the issue of the pricing of oil. And a few, maybe, I think days ago, we saw the first major drop in the prices of oil, which was something that most of these countries were worried about. And usually we have the discussions going on within the OPEC, whether to keep the price, change it, increase, decrease the price. These are very powerful countries in terms of the shift of the energy grid of the entire world. Having them present and having their energy ministers present, along with African countries, along with the rest of the world pretty much, is a very important venue for the discussion to take place under the auspices of Egypt before the COP. Again, a few months before the COP, which again will be also hosted by Egypt. So it's a precursor or a prelude that Egypt can definitely build on in terms of building networks and alliances before the bigger event later on this year.
Very much indeed, especially that we are speaking about too many developments that are occurring in the whole world that will reshape also lots of things in this particular sector. Now we move to our second segment, but before we start our discussion, let me first take this report. In Egypt and Germany witness cooperation and interest in various fields. Let's watch.
President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi met German Minister of Foreign Affairs Annalena Baerbock in Cairo on Saturday. President el-Sisi conveyed his greetings to German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. El-Sisi stressed on Egypt's close relations with Germany and keenness on strengthening cooperation and interests between the two countries in various fields. Egypt considers its partnership with Germany pivotal to its relations with Europe, given Germany's position and leverage as a major European country. The President also asserted on the importance of continuing cooperation between the two countries on the basis of mutual respect and balanced partnership regionally and internationally. The German Minister of Foreign Affairs conveyed to the President the greetings of the German Chancellor and affirmed that Germany values the strong and distinguished relations with Egypt as a cornerstone for stability and balance in the Middle East and Africa, as well as its fundamental role in combating terrorism and extremism. This is in addition to exerting efforts to combat illegal immigration and playing an appreciated ethical and humanitarian role by hosting millions of refugees, integrating them into society and providing them with all basic needs. She also emphasized the keenness of the new German government to support these relations to ensure strengthening and developing the existing partnership on various levels, as well as coordination on all regional issues of common interest. President el-Sisi and the German Foreign Minister also discussed Egypt's preparations to host the 2022 United Nations Climate Change Conference in Sharm el-Sheikh this November. The German minister praised the important role played by Egypt within the framework of the international and regional efforts to confront climate change. She looked forward to enhancing cooperation with Egypt in this regard. Egypt will also seek to build on the international momentum generated by the recent Glasgow conference and result in ambitious outcomes and initiatives that contribute to strengthening international climate action, particularly reducing emissions, building the capacity of developing countries to adapt to the negative effects of climate change and enhancing their ability to access climate funding.